In this tutorial, we'll cover the deformation tools, which are located in the Reshape suite of icons. These tools let you twist, bend, bulge, or taper any object in bonzai3d. We'll begin by creating a simple box. Select the rectangle tool, draw the rectangle, and extrude it into a solid object. Let's try the twist tool first. Click on the twist tool, click on the object, and a set of controls are displayed. Click on the yellow dot to drag the twist angle either graphically in the modeling window or type a value in the tool options palette. Click the center position option in order to twist it from the center of the object, or click the bottom option to twist the object from the very bottom. There's also a set of upper and lower limits that can be changed. The deformation will be applied within the area between the upper and lower limits. Click on another tool or begin the next operation, and the deformation is completed on the object. Undo the previous operation and select the Bend tool. Click on the object and click on the yellow deformation axis, and you can apply a bend to your object, either graphically or typing a number in the tool options palette. There's a second control, which is the bend direction, which gives us an angle that we can change the direction of that bending. We can also modify the position. Click center and we can bend it along the center of the object, or change the position to bottom, and now we can bend it from the bottom of the object. And just like the twist tool, there's also an upper and lower limit. So we can change those limits to apply that bend just to one part of the object. Undo the bend and let's try a bulge. Select the bulge tool and click on the object, and click and drag the yellow control to bulge the object. You can click along the red guideline to bulge it just in the X direction, or you can click and drag along the green axis to bulge it just in the Y direction. Or you can go in positive or negative directions for the bulging distance. Click on the magenta line and you can bulge the X and Y distance the same value. Click the center position to bulge it inward or outward from the center of the object. And just like the previous deformation tools, we have an upper and lower limit, so we can bulge just one part of that object. Undo, and now let's try the taper tool. Click on the object, and if we drag the yellow control handle, we can taper the top of the object. Drag it along the red guideline to taper it in the X direction, drag it along the green line to taper it in the Y direction, or drag it along the magenta line to taper it uniformly in both directions. Click on the center option and we can taper inward or outward from the center of the object. Or choose the bottom option to apply the taper to the very bottom. And just like the other deformation tools, we have the upper and lower limit to modify the area that's affected by that particular deformation tool. Now we'll look at the base reference plane parameter, which controls the orientation of the deformation axis. By default, the deformation axis is perpendicular to the active plane. One way to change the deformation axis would be to define a new reference plane using the reference plane tools. A second method is to select a reference plane in the Deform tool options. With a second method, you don't have to use the reference plane tools to create a new reference plane. Let's see how this works on some objects. We'll attempt to bend each object along its longer length. Set the base reference plane to active plane. This first object, since the base reference plane is the XY plane, we can bend it perpendicular to that plane. For this object, we'll have to switch to the YZ plane, so we can bend that along its length perpendicular to the YZ plane. For this third object, we'll have to switch to the ZX plane, so we can bend that along its length perpendicular to the ZX plane. Let's set the reference plane back to the XY plane. Undo the previous operations to return to our original objects. Let's try it without creating reference planes. Let's choose the base reference plane XY for this object and bend that perpendicular to the XY plane. And then for this object, we'll simply switch the base reference plane to the YZ plane, so we can bend it perpendicular to the YZ plane without creating a brand new reference plane. For this third object, we'll switch to the ZX reference plane, and I'll bend it perpendicular to the ZX without having to create a new reference plane. What if we have an object in which the intended deformation axis doesn't align with the X, Y, or Z axis? It's not a problem. Simply select the Define Reference Plane tool and click on the bottom face of the object. Now select your deformation tool. In this case, we'll use the radial bend. Choose the base reference plane to be the active plane. Click on the object and you'll see that the deformation axis is perpendicular to your custom plane. Don't forget that the position, top, center, or bottom, will affect which end of the object will be deformed. We'll conclude this tutorial with a brief sample project by creating a vase and flowers using the deformation tools. It should be noted that we shall perform the sample project with all the deformation parameters set to their defaults, as if you just launched bonzai3d. The first object we'll create is the vase. Select the polygon tool and draw a polygon, and if we have the 3D extrude icon selected, then we can extrude that into a solid object. The first deformation we'll apply is a bulge. Click on the object and drag along the magenta line to create a uniform bulge. The next deformation we'll apply is a taper. Click on the object, click on the control handle, and we'll move it in along the magenta guideline to taper it uniformly inward. The third and last deformation we'll apply is the twist. Click on the object and grab the control handle and twist that 180 degrees. This is a solid object at this point. If we want to open the top, we can choose the delete tool, hold down the Command can Mac or Control can Windows and click on the top face, and that will delete just the top face of that object. So our solid object is now a surface. Now let's create the flower. Select the vector line drawing tool, and with a 2D surface icon selected, we can draw a 2D shape. Switch from the vector line to a spline curve. We'll click a few more points, and be sure to click at the start to make it a closed shape. The next thing we'll do is apply a radial bend. We'll do it from the center, and we'll switch to the active plane and choose the ZX plane so we can go perpendicular to that plane. Grab the control handle, and you can see that we can bend it any direction we want. Let's set it to maybe about 90 degrees. So there's our first bend, to bend it in that direction. Now we need to make this a double curved surface, so we're going to bend it in the opposite direction. Go back to the bend tool, switch to the YZ plane, click on the object, and we're going to have to change the axis angle too. So let's grab this control and roll that up 90 degrees so we can bend it in that direction. And we'll bend it down probably maybe 130 degrees. And there's our double curved surface, which represents our flower petal. Now to finish the flower, it's just simply a matter of rotating and copying this object. So let's choose the rotate tool, multi-copy, and let's copy it 5 times. Click on the center and rotate that first one about 60 degrees, and we'll have 5 more copies for all of our flower petals. For the center of the flower, we'll just simply place a sphere in the center. So let's draw that on the XY plane. And then I'll have to move that down into position. So I'll select the Move tool, hit the Command can Mac or the Control can window to switch the perpendicular switch so I can move it perpendicular to the plane. And there's our flower. And now all we need to do is move the flower into position and then make copies of the flower, and our vase and flowers are now complete. And this concludes the bonzai3d Deformations tutorial.